very good evening to all of you in today's weekly current affair. Now, in this weekly current affair, we're going to cover the last week's current issues. Uh, the list is huge, so there's some little topics are also there. So quickly, just we'll see the list. So the content is the railway to become net zero carbon emission. There's an agreement on MSME. There's an article on Hindu on PC Mahalanobis. Who's PC Mahalanobis? We'll try to understand. ASEEM portal, equalization levy, uh, affordable housing rental scheme, agriculture infra fund, very recent government scheme, Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, impact reservation, postal ballots in elections, quorum, and World Drug List, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. A lot of in this Kuwait expat bill is in news, so we'll try to understand the implication. US stands on CASTA unchanged. What is CASTA? We'll try to get in the, this is in news since almost many years. Then we have some small topics related to environment, and these are factual ones. So quickly, again on this there is a Riva solar project. So these factual ones you can get in the in the MCQs for prelims. Now let's understand, and let's go with the first one. Railways to become net zero carbon emission mass transport by 2030, which means by 2030, railway wants that they should not emit carbon. Okay, so that is what the objective is. Indian Railways, wants to ensure that solarize railway stations by utilizing vacant lands for renewable energy projects. So as per the mission of Government of India, and also we have committed in the Paris climate change, that we're going to reduce our emissions by almost 33 to 35% by 2030. Okay, and that is called INDC. I'll discuss this part, don't worry. So moving to a net zero carbon emission, which means now the energy needed in the Indian Railways, they will not come from fossil fuel, rather they will come for renewable energy sector. So the idea here is to become self-reliant, as discussed. So Ministry of Railways has decided to install solar power plants on the vacant unused lands on mega scale. Now remember, two bodies in India, Railways and Army. They have huge land in India. So Railways and Army, they have huge land on India, and so use of solar power will accelerate the mission to achieve a conversion of Indian Railways to net zero carbon emission railway. So net zero carbon emission railway. Now this fact is important. Railway Energy Management Company Limited (REMCL) is working to use of solar energy on a mega scale. So this is the nodal body which is implementing this scheme. So it has already floated tenders of 2 gigawatt solar plants for Indian Railways. Indian Railways is also adopting innovative concept of installation of solar projects along with operational railway lines. So wherever there is a land, huge railway, as I mentioned, has after Indian Army, they have the most land in India, and so this will help in preventing encroachment, enhancing the speed, safety of trains, reduction in infrastructure cost due to direct injection of solar plant in the traction network. So the railway network there itself, it can be used. Indian Railways is leading in this fight against the climate change. There are significant steps towards meeting the ambitious goal of net zero carbon emission organizations and meeting India's INDC, intended nationally determined contribution targets. So let's understand what INDC is. Now, again, let's go a little more in the history. So in 1992, what happened? There was an Earth Summit, and this in Earth Summit, a body was created called UNFCCC, UNFCCC, that is United Nations Framework for Convention on Climate Change. So it was believed that now climate change initiatives will have to be, climate change is real, and hence initiatives will have to be taken by all the countries in the world to reduce the carbon emission or greenhouse gases. So under this, a lot of effort was made, and eventually in 1997, a protocol called Kyoto Protocol came into picture. So Kyoto is a place in Japan. So as per this protocol, the countries will make a target and they will try to reduce their emission in the whether developed or developing, and there is a concept of carbon credit that came. So I will not go into the concept of carbon credit, But overall, Kyoto Protocol put a binding agreements on the countries, a binding agreement that all the countries, especially the developed countries, will try to reduce their emission level so that we can fight the climate change. Kyoto Protocol ended, around in 2012, and when it ended, a new negotiation was supposed to be done, and so there was a Paris climate change which happened in 2015. So Paris climate change summit which happened, and here, so now remember in the previous experiment of Kyoto Protocol, the countries had virtually committed that they will reduce the carbon emission, and that emission was binding. So all the countries were forced to take measure, and these measures broadly will be in two areas. One is mitigation. What is mitigation? You try to reduce the carbon emission by maybe installing new technologies like that, and second is adaptation. So all the countries, especially developed countries, climate change is happening, and hence we have to ensure that the reason for climate change is human activities, and hence we have to control the human activities, and we will try to adopt new technologies. For example, right now we have BS6 vehicle, so it is going to reduce pollution in a huge way. So mitigation, and second would be the adaptation. So the future projects will be made in such a manner they will be energy efficient, or they will be environmentally more benign. So that is how the concept of climate change was initiated at global level. But many countries did not, follow Kyoto Protocol. Countries like USA, Russia, all of them, even though they were the real, culprits behind the entire climate change problems which we are witnessing today. 75% of the greenhouse gases we have in India, sorry, in the world, that has come from where? That has come from the developed nations. So climate change, initiatives were taken. Climate change adaptation initiatives should be taken by them. But you remember, if you are taking climate change initiative, what will happen? You have to have a cost on that. You have to invest on technology. You have to innovate. And not only here, the developed countries were also supposed to help in terms of technology and finances to the countries like India. So Kyoto Protocol, though it was initially, it looked like it was successful, but later on it was not successful because the bigger nations, countries like USA, they retracted, and that is where it was believed that we need to come with a new proposal. But the new proposal of Paris climate change, it said that now countries will not take a binding agreement, rather they will take a voluntary agreement, and every country will have an intended nationally determined contribution, INDC target, which means every country in the world, they will set themselves an INDC target for till 2030. Okay, so they will try to reduce the contribution, that they will try to reduce the greenhouse gases by making individual contribution. And here India committed that we are going to reduce our carbon emission by 33 to 35% by 2030, and the base year would be 2005. So whatever was the base year, whatever was the pollution level of greenhouse carbon emission of greenhouse gases in 2005, so we're going to reduce by 33% of 2005 level. So that was the intended nationally determined contribution, and this is a commitment made by all the countries, to the UNFCCC, that this is what we're going to do. So India is fast tracking all their projects, and India is one of the countries. Even China is doing quite well here. India is one of the countries in the world who has taken the lead in adapting and ushering the climate change initiatives. So this is the this is what, and maybe this example of railways. Okay, now emergency response program for MSME. Now MSME sector is always in news, if you remember. And why MSME sector is in news? Because MSME sector is facing a lot of problems. Before understanding the problems of MSME sector, let's understand what this sector is. MSME means micro, small, and medium enterprises. Okay, so government of India has come with their own formula that up to this investment level you are micro, up to this investment level you are small. Now MSME sectors, they are the second largest employment generating sector, and if I have to count about their contribution, after agriculture, they are the largest employer in India. So second largest employment generation, there are around 3.6 crore units in India, or 36 million you can say. And it generates an employment of around 120 million, which means around 12 crore people. So 12 crore people are employed here. So 12 crore into 5, if I say every individual who's working has a family of 5 members, so you can say almost 50 to 60 crore population, their livelihood is dependent on the MSME sector. Because MSME sector is labor absorbing. It absorbs labor, it gives employment. So right now, governments, if you try to read the government, the current affairs, you would find that the focus of government at this point of time is to ensure that MSME sector is taken care, the hand holding is required, loans have to be given, because in this COVID-19, MSME sector is facing a lot of challenges. So that is on the same background, World Bank and Government of India signed 750 million agreement for emergency response program to support the increased flow of finance in the hands of micro, small, medium enterprise severely impacted by COVID-19 crisis. So this COVID-19 crisis has affected everybody, specifically MSME sector. And good thing about India at this point of time that agriculture is doing well. The agriculture, which is employing around 50% of India's population, that is doing well. But other sectors, MSME, is facing the huge challenge, mostly because the industrial units across India, they are at several level of, even though lockdown has ended, but we are having mini lockdowns in small cities. For example, this place where I am, staying, there are hardly 10 cases there in my city, but government has, there are whole areas within the district headquarters, they have been locked down. In fact, the nearby many cities are under lockdown. Bihar government announced that from 16th to 31st there will be lockdown. So even though the government is trying to open, but at the same time, if the cases increase, it will be like on-off mode. It's like a cat and mouse game will go on with against COVID-19 crisis. So this is what the program is. This program intends to support the world, intends to support the MSME sector, where World Bank will ensure that finance is available to them. So what would be the agreement to protect MSME sector? Unlocking liquidity. Liquidity means availability of capital, money. Okay, availability of working capital mainly, because see, business were closed and now you have to restart. So for restarting, you need money. So money, government should ensure that money, the liquid money or the money should be easily available and with easy conditions in terms of loans, and almost collateral free loans should be given. So government is focusing on ensuring that abundant financial sector liquidity is available to NBFCs and that banks. What is NBFCs? Non-banking financial companies. Okay, so non-banking financial companies. For example, we have Tata Capital, okay, Reliance Capital, we have Muthoot Finance. So all these are non-banking financial companies, and they also provide loans to various firms. Banks and NBFCs have turned extremely risk averse. Why risk averse? Because of this COVID-19, the business have suffered. So bank feel that if we give loan, maybe the people will not be able to repay the loan. So project will support the government in providing targeted guarantees to incentivize NBFCs. The project will also support banks to continue lending to viable MSMEs who can do well and can sustain the crisis based on their balance sheet, based on their maybe sector. So that is what the aim is. It will be achieved by de-risking lending from banks and non-NBFCs to MSME. So here this fund will be used, World Bank fund will be used in helping them. So de-risking will be done through range of instruments, including credit guarantees. So credit guarantees will be given. So first is ensuring that there's adequate availability of money. आपको business जो चल रहा है उसको availability of credit and money should be available. That is the first objective. The second is strengthening NBFCs and small finance banks. Now remember, not only you have to ensure that money is given, but we also know that a lot of money will be NPA. The loan will suffer. And when the loan will suffer, you need to ensure that the NBFCs and small finance bank, they have adequate capacity. They have adequate maybe resilience. Okay, so here you have to improve the funding capacity, and at the same time you also have to ensure that the support should be given through loan and equity. So you should give them support as well. So improving funding capacity of NBFCs and small finance bank to respond to the urgent need of MSME. This will include supporting government's refinance facility for NBFC. In parallel, IFC, International Financial Corporation, it's a wing of World Bank. is providing direct support to small finance bank through loans and equity. So basically, World Bank will give loan. World Bank will give loans to the MSME, to NBFCs and banks, enabling financial innovation. Now remember, it is a crisis, and when there is a crisis, it is important that we have to, we have to come with the new innovative models of business. We have to, for example, today physical meeting is not possible, so we have to ensure online payment is something has to be there. NBFC is better non-banking financial companies. Okay, NBFCs. So only about 8% MSME are served by formal credit, and program will incentivize and mainstream financial technology, digital financial services in lending payment. Now you have to innovate, and you have to ensure that loan is given. You should not wait for 2 months or 1 month to get loan. Loan should be given, in a very small span of time. Technology should be used. Physical, location or physical, movement should not be allowed. Digitalized digital platform should be used. For example, if you want to open bank account today, you don't need to visit the bank. You can do it. You can do it online as well. You can, do through, video conferencing. You can, give the information, online form. Okay, so digital platform will play an important role by enabling lenders, suppliers, and buyers to reach the firms faster at lower cost. The digital platform will be helpful, especially to small enterprises who currently may not have access to formal channel. So that is what the major objective would be. So that completes this. So innovation is the key. Remember, MSME sector can one more thing I forgot to tell you about MSME sector. MSME sector also contribute 45% of India's exports, and they have huge potential. If you want to reduce our import, MSME sector can be the key. So self-reliance, in the vision of self-reliance, MSME sector will be the game changer. Now, recently there was an article in Hindu, and it discussed about PC Mahalanobis. PC Mahalanobis was, you can say, the architect of, India's planning. So all the India's planning. So he brought 5-year plans in India, and these 5-year plans started in 1951 and it continued till 2012. So he was also said to be a plan man of India and architect of country's statistical system. And there was an article where it was believed that one thing we are facing, that government, data is lacking, because when there was a huge lockdown which almost continued for 2 months, the government bodies which collect data like NSSO or Central Statistical Organization, I have my friends in these bodies, so they also could not collect data because data was not easily available, and hence, or maybe you need 10 data but only 2 data is available, so you can't create a parameter. And this article was in the same background. This article came in Hindu, and this said that in 1944, when the Bengal famine happened, PC Mahalanobis, who was around that time, he conducted large scale surveys of Bengal famine between July 1944 and 1945, and the sample survey helped the analysis, the causal analysis, the cause effect analysis, and assess the potential of disaster and estimate the number of people affected. So what is the need of any survey? Survey has objective. Maybe you want to know certain numbers, you want to know the impact. So there was a Bengal famine 1994 में जब हुआ था. So this PC Mahalanobis, he conducted a survey. So it was, and why it was discussed, because the person who wrote the article, he said that government should also understand and assure that they should collect data in this COVID crisis as well. So Bengal famines remind that we need estimates of millions who will lose jobs or livelihood in today's pandemic, and extent of feasibility, success, and problem of online access also needs to be properly estimated in this new dawn. Okay, so he discussed that why Mahalanobis is important, and he discussed that how Mahalanobis conducted large-scale surveys. He was instrumental in creating a body called CSO in 1951, Sample Survey Organization in 1950. So this article was discussing that we need to bring, or maybe to remember, Mahalanobis, because he was a person who used technology, who ensured that data is collected. Because if you have data, you can take decisions, you can plan things. Let's say there is a data on how this pandemic will respond. Okay, how this pandemic will impact the economy. Now you have various reports, but remember, every report will have certain data behind the analysis. But let's assume in India's case, now India, our own bodies are more you can say, have the capacity to understand the problem. The international bodies or the bodies outside India might not be in a situation to understand the local situation. Hence it is important that we use our own understanding and data. And CSO and NSSO, they have a very strong mechanism. They have a strong legacy also. So this data will help us to maybe government. Let's say government knows that there will be a problem in November. There will be huge joblessness. So they will plan accordingly, and accordingly the resources can be managed. So this is the article that discuss. The article mentions that statistics is very important for human welfare and national development. So this you can read it. It was an article in Hindu. Now, recently government announced ASEEM portal. What is ASEEM? Atmanirbhar Skill Employment Employees, Skilled Employee Employer Mapping. So you want to map the people who are providing employment and people who have the skill. So Union Ministry of Skill Development has launched Atmanirbhar Skilled Employer-Employee Mapping portal to help skilled people and find sustainable livelihood opportunities. So let's say I have a certain skill and I'm jobless and I need to look for new job. So it is practically impossible to find where I have jobs. So this portal will collate all the data at one place, and all the data trend analytics will be there, where people whose data information is updated here, that can be mapped with the job requirement thing. So it is developed by, this is important, National Skill Development Corporation in collaboration Bangalore-based company called Better Place. Now, what is it? It is an AI, artificial intelligence-based portal, which will map details of workers based on regions, local industry demands, and bridge the demand-supply gap of skilled workers across sector. See, one of the problems that India faces in skilled labor, that even though we have skill, there is a lack of proper mapping. So proper mapping is needed. Mapping means what kind of skill the industry requires and what kind of skill people we have, and hence we need to map them. The second is also, it is more, we need to organize it. Right now, a lot of data that we have, it is still unorganized. So National Skill Development Corporation, in this ASEEM portal, it is an opportunity. And probably, see, when there is a crisis, you respond with a double force, you respond with a triple force. Okay. Utkarsh is a question. This is a government job portal or private job? Utkarsh, it is open for everybody. Mainly it is for private job. It will provide employers, mainly employers will be private only, employers with a platform to assess the availability of skilled workforce and formulate their hiring plans. Okay, so this is the ASEEM portal. So that is all. Now coming to equalization levy. What is equalization levy? So in 2016, government came with a concept called Google tax. So let's say you want to promote something. So you have options like, you want to promote on newspapers, you want to promote on media, television channel. But now today you can do Google ads, you can do Facebook ad. So government realized that a lot of people are using technology, and technology has outreach to almost all the players. So Google, company can be there, or Amazon, Flipkart, Amazon. So they have all your information and data, and they can easily use this data. Now coming here is that once, if you are using Google for doing business, or using Facebook for doing business, or any e-commerce companies for doing business, so on the transaction you should pay taxes. So that is what equalization levy is all about. So now recently what happened that maybe there was a demand for extending the deadline for payment. For example, for GST we had a deadline of 30th of June. So government said that now we'll not extend the deadline. You have to pay the GST by 30th of June, and or else you have to pay penalty. Now penalty will be reduced penalty, but you have to pay. So here also government is not considering to extend the deadline of payment equalization levy on non-resident e-commerce players. So this is imposed on non-resident. Okay, for example, e-commerce company which are not based in India, even though majority of them are yet to deposit their first installment of the tax. So it is also called as Google tax. It was introduced in 2016 with the intention of taxing digital transaction. Now read this, note this word. The income accruing to foreign e-commerce companies from India. It is aimed to tax business to business transaction. Now, if your transaction is more than 1 lakh, if the company's transaction is more than 1 lakh, and you're using the digital technology, you have to make the payment. So following service will be currently covered in the equalization levy, the online advertisement. So you do online advertisement, Google ad, you must have seen Google ad, Facebook, promotion we see. So that is online advertisement. Any provision for digital advertising space or facilities service for the purpose of online advertisement. Equalization levy. Now what exactly it is? It is a direct tax. Remember, it is very important. It is a direct tax which is withheld at the time of the payment by the service recipient the two conditions to be met to be liable to be levy is the payment should be made to a non-resident service provider, okay, and the annual payment made to one service provider should exceeds 1 lakh in 1 year. So the payment should be more than 1 lakh, then only the tax will be applicable. Right now, I think it is 6%. I have to check that, but I think it is around 6%. So this is the equalization levy. It was in news right now, but already in UPSC this question has come in 2018 prelims. The question has already come on this. So but again it was in news. Why was it introduced in India? Over the last decade, IT has gone through exponential expansion. So IT has grown up, and that is where it is believed that if the digital services will increase, people use digital services, so government should be taxing that. Okay, so consequently, this has given to rise of various new business models where heavy reliance on digital and telecommunication network is being used, and that is where government introduced equalization levy. Okay, so you can read it. Now, this is a very good scheme. Recently, government announced affordable rental housing complexes (AHRC) for urban migrants and poor. So, what government is planning that they will use already housing complexes that they have. Okay, and these are under government control, and mostly they are vacant. So, government can give them these housing complexes. They can maintain them and can give them on rent to the migrant labor. Okay, so here these projects, now already the projects are there, they are vacant. So again, now here the people who will develop them, mainly government will be involved here. Okay, so these are the provisions which is there. Now Union Cabinet has given proposal approval for developing affordable rental housing complexes for urban migrants and poor. So this is important, urban migrants and poor. It is a sub scheme of PM Awas Yojana Urban, so PMAY. Under the scheme, the existing vacant government funded housing complex will be converted in AHRC. So there are a lot of government funded housing complexes which are not used right now because the demand has come down. Through concession agreements for 25 years, the concessionaire will make the complexes livable. Now you will give this contract to some company, okay? Yes, PM Awas Yojana started 2-3 years ago. So concessionaire will make the complexes livable by repairing them, retrofit, maintenance of room, okay, and the state and UT will select the concessionaire through transparent bidding. So let's say you have a company and you want to take this housing complex, so you have to bid for that, and complex will revert to urban local bodies. So all the concessionaire, for example, the companies who will get them, they can use it for 25 years. Okay, after 25 years, and then it will go to urban local bodies. Now, who are the beneficiaries? The large part of workforce in manufacturing, service industry, hospitality, domestic, construction, laborers, etc., students who come from rural and a small town, they would be the target beneficiary. They will be given, but these houses will be given on rent. Okay, usually these migrants live in slums, informal, unauthorized colonies, peri-urban area. Peri-urban means just outside the urban area, undeveloped urban area. Okay, to save rental charges. They spend a lot of time on roads by walking, cycling to workplaces, risking their lives to cut on the expenses. And it will create a new ecosystem in urban areas, making housing available at affordable rent close to the place of work. So investment in AHRC is expected to create new job opportunities. Why? Because all these complexes will require maintenance, will require first the finishing work will be required, and that is the objective. So my only concern is that how many people is going to support, because even though the scheme is not that big, maybe it might support maybe a few lakhs people, but the kind of the laborers or migrant labor that we have in India, that is in crores. Okay, so that goes in crores. Now recently this agricultural infrastructure fund was again in news. So what is AIF? Now we all know that one of the challenges of Indian agriculture is that we have not made much investment in agriculture in comparison to what we have made in services and industry. Now question comes in that why investment has not been made, because most of the budget money of the government of India or budgetary provision, it goes to subsidy, agriculture subsidy, food security, okay, and maybe loan waiver. So the kind of money that is left with government is very less. So that is where the investment in agriculture is limited. So Utkarsh has a question. Utkarsh, new complexes will not be built. The existing affordable projects will be converted. Only the existing complexes will be converted. Okay, the vacant ones. They will try to utilize it because, see, because of the real estate, is almost going through a recession. So there are a huge number of projects which are almost complete, but there are no takers for them. So probably the government wants, government is going to give those projects. So that is where, to ensure that the agricultural infrastructure, you have a house in affordable. I have to check. I don't know. We need to check. So, but you don't have. I mean, you have a house, right? But here, maybe the whole housing complex, whether it will come in that has to be seen. First, they will make a list of the housing complex which might come under that, and then they will identify a bidder who will maintain the project, and that bidder will take, give it to the people who, maybe the migrant labor who will take on rent. Okay, so let's come. So the Agricultural Infrastructure Fund is a specific fund specifically for developing the rural infrastructure in agriculture area. So what does it do? It will provide long-term debt financing facility. So they will provide long-term loan to the projects for agriculture. So projects, viable projects for post-harvest management, developing farming assets. So let's say you want to develop, farming assets like cold storage chains. Okay, so you can develop that. And here 1 lakh crore will be provided by banks and financial institutions. Who would be the beneficiaries? The beneficiaries would be Primary Agriculture Credit Society, PSCS. So they are at village level. Okay, farmer producer organization, small farmers. All these people will get loans, and they can invest in their areas. And here the loan will have moratorium, which means moment if you take a loan today, you have to pay the EMI after 6 months to 2 or after 2 years, depending on. Okay, so because if you invest that money, from getting a return, from day one is difficult. So that is what the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund is. Now this is important. Management of AIF. It will be managed and monitored through online management MIS system, management information system, and there will be a national, state, and district level monitoring committee for the real-time monitoring. And duration of the scheme is financial year 2022 to 2029. Now remember, this is a new fund, and hence it is important for examination. So do follow it, and I think a lot of changes or new things will also be updated in the coming days. So this is AIF. It will provide farmer credit to farm and farm processing based activities and create a lot of jobs in India. And it will enable all qualified entities to apply for loan under the fund. So the fund will also help people to get loans and invest in the projects. Now recently, Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana. So this scheme is a part of the economic response package of this COVID-19, and government said that the government is giving 5 kg of ration for free per person, for free. Ration means here I mean to say wheat or rice, and plus 1 kg of gram, okay, pulses, chane ki dal. So another scheme, it is proposed to distribute 9.7 lakh metric ton cleaned whole chana to states UT for distribution to all the beneficiaries. Who will the beneficiaries? The beneficiaries under National Food Security Act. So it is expected that it will going to support around 19 crore families. Okay, so it will be 1 kg per month free of cost under the next 5 years. All expenses on the extended PMGY are to be borne by the central government. So government of India will bear this, and 19.4 crore household will be covered in the scheme. So household matlab ek household mein 5 log ho sakte hain. So 19 into 5, you can say around 90 to 95 crore people are going to benefit in India. That is huge, and this will be free, remember. The extension of the scheme is in line with the commitments of Government of India to allow anybody, especially any poor family, to suffer on account of non-availability of food. So because of the COVID region, the impacts have the COVID problem, the economy has impacted, the income has impacted. Okay, so this will also ensure that people get this, and the whole chana means it has protein item, so that will also ensure availability of protein to the families. So this is a just scheme mentioning was there. Now, analyzing the impact of reservation. Now remember, reservation, before understanding the reservation, what exactly is reservation? So reservation is given to, in jobs and educational institutions, okay, educational institutions, to SCs, ST and OBCs. In the original constitution, in the beginning, 15% reservation was given to SC, 7.5% reservation was given to ST, and later on 27% reservation was given to OBCs. And recently, a year ago, 10% extra reservation is given to EBC, economically weaker section, EWS. Okay, so these are the reservations that we have. In total, that reservation reaches around 60% in India. This reservation is as per the affirmative action. Now government wants to ensure that people who had injustice, and this reservation was based on the primary criteria of social and educational backwardness. Okay, so on the primary criteria of social and educational backwardness, the reservation was there. Now reservation was mainly in terms of job and education, and here there are some data which has come, and let's understand this data. And EWS, economically weaker section, okay, this 10%. So people whose income is less than 8 lakh rupees annual income, and this housing requirement is also there, so that will also come under EWS. So these are reservation apart from this. This reservation, the first 3 is based on social educational backwardness, but ये जो 10% that is based on economically weaker section. So how reservation help the SCs and OBCs? There are some figure. So reservation is important or not, that is a different debate, but reservation has the intention to ensure that everybody in society who are not represented in in job, or because of their historical background of maybe injustice or whatever, they belong to lower caste, they should be given a kind of a lift, a kind of a help, and that comes under positive discrimination. So the concept is based on positive discrimination. Okay, and Indian Constitution, Article 14, Article 15, Article 16, all they talk about the reservation provision. Okay, so this is fundamental right. Now, but recent time, a lot of debate has started happening where you are also discussing about that reservation should be given private organization as well. Now, question comes in that what has happened? See, in recent time, government is reducing their job. Government is not coming with a new job, and the number of jobs in the government that is coming down, and that is where the reservation data is discussed here. So let's try and understand. So in the central administrative services, SC has reached 14% of the class C in 1984, and they have reached 14.3 of the class B in 2003, and being class C 13.3%. So this is the number they are saying, that out of the reservation allowed. Okay, so Dakshta has a question. How is reservation a fundamental right? Dakshta beta, I'll take this concept in the end. Probably after the class, I'll discuss this concept. It is a polity concept that needs to be discussed in detail. So fundamental right is about ensuring everybody is equal, but people who are among the people who are, there are people who are even everybody is not equal. So how do you ensure that? How do you ensure equality among unequals? And the basic objective is that people who are at the bottom of the pyramid, socially and educationally, they need to be given certain maybe concession, and they need to be given certain help, and that is where the number of seats will be fixed for them on that basis. Okay, so that is whole the concept of reservation is. ABC, so you have class, okay, A class 1 officers, A, B, C, D. So these are, so this is higher, this is a peon level, this is clerical level, this is mid level, and this is top level is the maybe IS or IPS. So that is what the number is shown. Okay, so this is saying that how this article is talking about how SCs and OBCs have got help of the reservation, and the numbers have changed. So you can see that in central public sector enterprise also there is a reservation, and out of so many people, this is the number of people from SCs, and this is the number of people in the central public sector enterprises. So 100 may say 14% of SC, 14.3 of, so these data are there. How reservation? In parallel, SC literacy rate jumped from 21.38% to 66.1% from 81 to 90 in 2011. Now, mostly in the original constitution, the first amendment was made, and there we gave the reservation. This was in 1951. Now, when the reservation was given in the first Amendment Act itself, it was mainly for SC and ST. But later on, there was a Mandal Commission report which talked about OBC reservation, and this report came in, I think, in 1979, and it was implemented in 1989 by VP Singh, who was the Prime Minister. So Mandal Commission was for OBC reservation, and as per him, the OBC were around 52% of India's population, and they should be given reservation also on that basis, and they're also backward. So SC, ST were original backward, and OBC are other backwards. Okay, so you can see here number of people, the OBCs who are in job, and their number has jumped in CPSE from 16.6% to 28.5. Now these numbers are not important. You just need to understand that in the past few years or few decades, the number of people who have benefited from reservation has gone up. So that from government's point of view, we are able to maybe reaching out to people who are from weaker section. But there is a problem. The problem is the number of jobs are coming down. Which jobs? Government jobs. The government jobs are declining. And why government job is declining? Because after 1991, government came with the mantra of LPG. What is LPG? Liberalization, privatization, globalization. Now government says that now we don't want to give jobs. We will ensure that private should give jobs, and we should facilitate that environment. So you can see here the number of vacancies has surged from 5.5 lakh to 7.5 lakh. So itni vacancies abhi hai in government of India. Okay, and number of employees has dropped from 32.69 in Zone 3 to 26.6 in central government services. So only 26.3 lakh, almost 6 lakh people जो drop हुए हैं, and the number of vacancies are also around 7.5 lakh. Now a basic question comes in that vacancies अगर जो आई हैं तो why we are not employing them? Can you tell me the reason why government is not employing these vacancies? Anybody? What is the reason why government is not filling these jobs? Why government is not coming with a proposal to fill all these jobs? Any reason? Primarily, the first thing is government wants to reduce number of jobs, because all these jobs come with a huge burden of salaries, pensions and all those things. So they come with a huge burden, and also government is always in deficit. Okay, because India has a huge welfare consideration, and because of that the government budget is going up for welfare every year. So it is very difficult for government to give salaries. So that is another problem. So number of jobs also going down, and OBC's benefiting from reservation has gone up, okay, from 14.89 to 23.5, and reservation have also been undermined by lateral entry. In recent time, government is also allowing lateral entry. What is lateral entry? Mid-level entry. Mid-level entry. So that is also there. So a lot of people are questioning also that if you allow people, let's say at joint secretary level, so you allow people to enter, okay, new people to enter, okay, people from industry, people from expert areas. Yes, revenue expenditure will increase, Shiva. Okay, so this procedure undermined the reservation system because of the quota did not apply. So in this quota was not applying, and a lot of people had questions that you allow mid-level entry of people and reservation is not applicable here. Now, one more debate that is going on, that the reservation, there is some flaws in the reservation process as well, and hence it needs to be regrouped. So there was a judgment that UGC allowed shift from, what is UGC? University Grant Commission. Now remember, one of the largest employer in India is Education and Health Department, especially Education Department. There are so many universities in India, the central universities, and here in this university, the reservation is not given to university as a whole, but to department level. So at department level, it is decided that employment should be available and reservation should also be there. So this has led to reduce the quantum number of reserve seat and restricted the entry of lower caste. The people in lower caste, they feel and believe that उनका जो यूनिवर्सिटी लेवल पे है, प्रोफेसर लेवल पे है, at that level the jobs they are not getting. They are not getting jobs at that level, and there's a manipulation by department heads who preferably belong to a higher caste, and they do not allow people from lower caste to enter there. So there are a lot of vacancies also. They don't allow the vacancies to be filled, and there is a question that maybe government needs to do something to maybe address this anomaly. Okay, so these are the data is there. One more question is that reservation in job. So Dakshta has a question: isn't casteism one of the major problems for employment? Casteism as an employment problem? Well, definitely there are certain individual cases, but as for the employment is concerned in government jobs, they are followed as per the rules. Okay, so maybe if you meet the rules, but areas where discretion is allowed, okay, where discretion is allowed, where the entry level, let's say I'm the head of the department and I will decide whether the seat is filled or not. So I don't allow the seats to be filled. So at that level, maybe it is there. Okay, and people from I belong to a certain caste, so I'll prefer people from my own caste because I consider that maybe I'm little caste, maybe I'm little caste supportive, maybe on that ground. So definitely there are certain cases which are there. This idea of reservation I will not discuss today because it will require me to cover at least 30-35 minutes I have to discuss. So I'll leave it now. You can leave it for now because I have to discuss how the reservation has evolved. And there are two things. Reservation is there, but is there reservation in promotion? In promotion of jobs? Yeah, there is. So there are a lot of debates and a lot of government Supreme Court rulings. So it is not possible for me to explain in 5-10 minutes. I need at least 35-40 minutes to explain the entire history. So you can leave it for now because since it was in news, it is put here. And here government, reservation in job was not a fundamental right. Okay, and this has been questioned. And yes, reservation in job is not a fundamental right. And there is a different process that is being followed here. Well, that is there. So I will leave it for now, this whole 2 pages, and I will discuss sometime later. Okay, I'll discuss in the polity lecture because it is huge topic. In fact, it will cover at least 45 minutes for me to cover them. So अभी के लिए इसको छोड़ देते हैं because since it is mentioned in the article. Now coming to next news, postal ballots in election. Am I going fast, guys? Is it okay? The speed is okay, right? Am I going fast? Everybody? Anybody? You're able to understand things, right? See, because there are a lot of new students here in the class, so current affair थोड़ा मुश्किल होता है. Okay, Vaishnavi, it's a debate. Okay, चलो ठीक है. It's fine. Okay, fair enough. So Election Commission has announced that it will allow those above 65 as well as under home or institutional quarantine to use postal ballot during Bihar elections. So Bihar elections is due in in winters. So right now postal ballot is allowed, and these postal ballots are mainly for the armed forces. But now because of this COVID-19, people above a certain age cannot go outside and vote because there is a risk, and hence government and election commission is thinking that let's allow postal ballots to the vulnerable section. Opposition parties are unhappy with the move and have termed it unconstitutional. And why? So let's understand what is postal ballot. So postal ballot में क्या होता है? A restricted set of workers can exercise postal balloting, and though this facility is voter can cast her vote remotely by recording her preference, his or her preference on ballot paper and sending it back to the election officer before counting. Who can avail the facility? Now this is important. Members of the armed forces like Army, Navy, Air Force, members of the armed force, police force of the state serving outside the state, government employees posted outside India, and their spouses. In other words, they can't vote in person. Voters under preventive detention. अगर आप जेल में हैं under preventive detention, then also you can vote. Special voters such as President of India, Vice President, Governor, Union Cabinet Ministers, Speakers of the House, and officers on poll duty also have an option to vote by post. So they can also vote, but they don't vote. Rather, they vote in normal fashion. But they do have the privilege. But they have to apply through prescribed form to avail this facility. So if they might come with a question in MCQ UPSC in postal ballot, and they might put here the President of India can also have an option to vote by post. Okay, so you might say no, but it is true. They can vote, but they have to fill a different form if they want to avail the facility. So the right now postal ballot is allowed to army people and the president, vice president, governors, speakers, government officers on poll duty. Now next concept is called absentee voters. Okay, so recently Law Ministry at the behest of Election Commission has introduced a new category called absentee voters. Now who can also opt? So absentee voters kaun hai? These absentee voters are somebody who are employed in essential services and unable to cast. Let's say the officials of Delhi Metro, Northern Railway, freight and passenger, media people. So these people, let's say they because of their job profile, they are maybe on the move and hence they can't vote. So they should also be allowed. First, they should be categorized as absentee voters. They can't go and vote because for voter, for people to vote, they need to have a voter ID. Okay, so they need a voter ID, and you can vote only at a specific place. You can't vote anywhere. So there's the problem. So these absentee voters can also vote. It's a proposal. And last month, senior citizens, and so right now we have these people also absentee voters. The COVID people, the above age 65, can also be there, and the home quarantine and institutional quarantine people will be there. So this is the postal ballot news that was there. Now, how the votes are recorded by post? The returning officer is supposed to print ballot papers within 24 hours of the last date of nomination withdrawal and dispatch them within a day. So when everything is final, the returning officer, they will print the ballot papers, and it will reach the concerned person before the polling date, so that they have enough time, they can vote it back. Postal ballot papers for members of the armed forces are sent through their recorded office. For members of the armed police force of the state, government employees posted outside India, their spouses ballot paper can be sent through post or electronically. So it can be done through electronically also, and here they can cast their vote and send back to the returning officer. For renaming categories, ballot paper are delivered personally. So postal ballot के बारे में काफी news है. I think it is a new information and it is in debate. So let's expect the questions in the prelims. Now, question is that why political parties, especially from opposition, are unhappy. They feel that since it's a easy decision to allow voters, but they feel that postal ballot can be misused, and their first contention was that none of the government people, they took their view. The consulting political parties were not taken into consideration, and they fear that this move will lead to malpractice and foul play by those parties who are in power. So people who have power and who are in resources, that is what opposition party do. Opposition party will always question any government move, remember, because their name is opposition, so they will oppose everything. Okay, so what is the issues? Allowing 65 plus and above the vote by postal ballots violates secrecy. Why? Because let's say I'm less literate, I am not able to understand things, so I might take help from others. So this will end up disclosing their preferred candidate, and it also exposes them to administrative influence or influence by the government or the ruling party. Because see, the number of people who are 65 plus, see, right now the people who are in armed forces, there are only few, but people who are 65 plus, that number will be huge. So that is why this debate is being put across. Okay, so this is the postal ballot. You can read them, you can understand them. Now there is a concept of quorum. What is quorum? Let's understand. Quorum is the minimum attendance. Okay, so Parliament has a quorum. Parliament of India, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So there is a quorum that at least 10% members should be there. So if the number of people in the house is 450, so at least 45 members should be there. Then only the proceedings will start, daily proceedings. So that is quorum. But because of this COVID-19, Parliament is not able to meet. Why? Because most of the member of Parliament, they are in their home constituencies, and trains are not running, or even they are running. The schedule is very infrequent or less frequent, and there are problem also because of the COVID. Another thing is that Parliament will have to sit in this, and maybe people might sit together in the close vicinity. So these are the problems. So what government is thinking, they are thinking of new proposals, and they're putting in place a new framework under which people the member of parliament can sit with proper social distancing and other measures. But the house business should go on. And recently, the Rajya Sabha Secretariat, it said that the standing committee meetings does not require quorum. In a normal situation, the quorum is needed. Before, if the quorum is not there, house cannot meet. Okay, let's say मतलब proceeding house का चल रहा है, if the number of members are less than 10%, the house will not meet. But opposition parties has contradicted the holding of virtual meetings of standing committees to ensure quorum during the deliberations. Okay, so now virtual meetings are happening, and that is where opposition parties have a problem. Parliamentarians, these are unable to travel to Delhi for obvious COVID reason. Rajya Sabha Secretariat has said that quorum was essential only when the committees are making decisions and adopting reports, and not during routine deliberations. So what are committees? See, we have a parliament, and parliament is very busy body, and it's very busy body. It meets 3 times in a year, or maybe 3 sessions rather. Okay, so practically they meet for 4 months in a whole year, and so it is a busy body. And that is where we have innovated a concept of committee system, where we will reduce some load and will pass the parliament work to the committee. And these committee members are the member of parliament, MPs only, okay, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. But the committees are very specific. Okay, the committees are very specific and they create with a specific purpose. For example, committee on security will focus only on the security issues. Committee on some other area will focus on that area. So Rajya Sabhas, also have a lot of committees. They have standing committees, they have departmental committees, and these are full-time committees. They work. Mainly, what they do that they have a power, and this committee will be supported by a technical team, and this technical team will scrutinize the government proposal, will question the government officials, and that is how check and balance mechanism is maintained in the in the parliament. So parliamentarians, so Rajya Sabha, because there are has said that quorum is essential. But important decisions for routine work, quorum is not needed, which means even if there's 1 Rajya Sabha member, 2 Rajya Sabha member out of the 30 members, the function will go on. Quorum is the minimum number of members of deliberative assembly necessary to conduct business of that group. The requirement of the quorum is protection against totally unrepresentative action in the name of the body by unduly small number of person. So हमारे Indian Parliament में Article 100 is mentioned, and that says that at least 10% should be there. The number of people in the house, and similarly for states we have Article 189. Okay, for example, if house has membership of 500, at least 50 members should be present of the house to proceed the business. So this is the concept of quorum. Now next is what are standing committees. As I mentioned, standing committees are committees consisting of MPs. It is a permanent and regular committee which is constituted from time to time according to the provisions of the Act of the Parliament, rules of procedure. The work done by the parliament is not only voluminous but also complex. Hence, a good deal of work is carried on by the parliamentary committees. So let's say the technical work. So it is passed to the committee, and committees have MPs. Remember, they are also not technical, but this committee will be supported by a technical team. Let's say there is an issue on world trade. Now, world trade is a technical issue. So here, we have made a different committee on world trade, and the committee will have members of parliament, but they'll have a strong support mechanism, a secretariat kind of thing. Those people will be technical and they will be helping. Okay, so parliament, बहुत सारा काम, lot of work done by the parliament is passed to the committees, because parliament is already busy, does not have much time. So there are a lot of committees, standing committees, for example, financial standing committees, departmental related standing committees, other standing committees. So there are multiple committees that is being followed, and the member of parliament जो होते हैं MPs of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, they become part of these committees. Okay, so that is in news right now. These are today, there's nothing big news here. Small news are there. Okay, as per the big issues are not there in this week, and that is why we have some small news. Recently, World Drug Report has come of United Nations of Drug and Crime, and it says that India, the 4th highest seizure opium, India was reported from India after Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. So opium or drug is banned, and hence seizure is done. We seize it. So almost 644 tons opium was seized in Iran, followed by 27 tons in Afghanistan, 9 tons in Pakistan. India stood at 4 tons in 2018. Now we have drugs. Now remember, this whole topic, drug and all, it come under the internal security issues. So there's a topic in internal security that we'll be covering in internal security topic. So heroin is manufactured from morphine extracted from the seeds of pod of opium poppy plants. And Iran reported the highest seizure of heroin, 25 tons, followed by Turkey, US, China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Okay, India was 12th position. So this is the reality right now. And recently, a lot of seizures have been done, and that is what the report says. Now, before telling you, I'll show you a graph. Okay, so this is India, right? And this is the hub of the entire drug trade which happens. So we also have to, to Mexico and Colombia also there. So they are, very famous for drug trade. But India, opium cultivation, because opium is a source of all the drug, mainly opium cultivation, जिसको हम हिंदी में अफीम बोलते हैं. Okay, so we have afim, opium cultivation. So this opium cultivation is mainly done into two areas. One is a golden crescent and golden triangle. So golden crescent consists of Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, mainly Afghanistan, and golden triangle consists of the northeast, just around the countries in the northeast area, the Vietnam, Burma, Thailand, Laos. So India is sandwiched between both the hubs of where most of the this drug is being produced. Okay, so this is the problem, and the drug trade happens across India. You can see this India. This is the region of drugs. Punjab is heavily affected. Rajasthan is affected. So we'll come to that. So 97% of the total global production of opium in last 5 years came only for 3 countries. 84% of opium came from Afghanistan. Why Afghanistan? Practically there is zero control. There is Talibanis, they do that, and all of the trade is illegal. Where it is supplied to neighboring countries, Europe, West Asia, South Asia, Africa, from Myanmar, which accounts for 7% of the global opium production, Laos 1%, and it is supplied to Southeast Asia and Oceania. Okay, Oceania is small islands in the Pacific Ocean. Mexico accounts for 6% of the global opium production, while Colombia and Guatemala account for around 1%. So these are the countries where maximum drug is being produced. A report said that global area under opium cultivation has declined, and despite the decline, the opium production remained stable, and quantities of seizure remain constant in Asia. So most of the seizure happens in Asia because Asia is the source. Maximum drug is being produced in Asia only. So Asia is host of more than 90% of the global illicit opium production. Also, it is the world's largest consumption market for opiates and also accounts for 80% of the all opiates seized worldwide in 2018. So this is the drug report. And which are the affected states? This is affected, and Northeast is heavily affected. Manipur, the Northeast state. A lot of young children, and same goes with Punjab. We don't know the numbers, but Punjab, young children, the school-going children, they're getting impacted, and it is very difficult there. You must have a lot of movies also on this. So this is Iran. This is Golden Crescent, as I mentioned, and these are states impacted. So Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan from Golden Crescent, major drug producers and suppliers. Heroin enters through 550-kilometer Punjab border from Afghanistan via Pakistan. Opium enters India through Punjab border of Afghanistan via Pakistan. Opium and poppy husk enter Punjab through Rajasthan via Haryana. Okay, so these are the trade sources. You just need to know. See, Disha has a question. What is the important in this news to focus on? It will just the report is there. So that report is just information that is available, and maybe you might get a question on internal security, on what government should do to control it. So if you know the area Golden Crescent and Golden Triangle, you will be able to understand this. Okay, so that is it. Now, international covenant. What is covenant? Covenant is agreement on civil and political rights. So, United Nations UN Special Rapporteur have made public their third communication forward to India, expressing concern over alleged excessive use of force, ill treatment during arrests and detentions. So, this is a body which has questioned India's. Recently in Tamil Nadu, you must have seen that 2 people, father and son, they had a custodial death. Okay, and because of that, this is in news again and again. And we have a UN convention against any kind of torture. So what is convention? Conventions are like protocols accepted everywhere. Protocols are laws. Okay, so we have UN Convention, and as per that, UN has urged Indian government to conduct a prompt and impartial investigation in the alleged allegations of arbitrary killings, torture, ill treatment, as per the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights and Article 7 and 12 of Committee Against Torture. So this is the issue right now, and that is where UN body has urged. Now you can understand what this covenant is. So this is mentioned. What this covenant is, it is a multilateral treaty. Now remember, this is important for MCQs, prelims. It is a multilateral treaty. Multilateral means it can have multiple countries. Adopted in UN General Assembly in 1966, and it came into application in 1976. It commits the parties. Who are parties? The countries. Okay, the countries whosoever sign them, to respect the civil and political rights of individual, including the right to life, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, electoral rights, right to due process and fair trial. Okay, and it has 173 parties and 6 more signatories without ratification. 173 means 173 countries hai iska matlab. It is a part of International Bill for Human Rights along with International Covenant of Economic, Social, Cultural Right and Universal Declaration of Human Right. It is monitored by UN Human Rights Committee, a separate body of UN Human Rights Council. So ये बहुत fact important है. Okay, so you can, there's a question can come on this. So read it properly, because you do get questions like this in MCQs, prelims. So you have to make a list of all such topics which might be in news, and sure short questions come here. Remember. Okay, so you don't take casual mat hona jab is tarah ke articles come in. Then UN Convention Against Torture. It's a human rights treaty under review of UN, adopted in 1984. So now question is that India has not ratified. India is a party, but India has not ratified. Ratified means Parliament's approval is not there. Okay, so these laws, these are international laws or maybe treaties, but they can't force anything to do. They're just like a, you're not doing this, do it properly. They're like questioning you, or they're like putting, they will come with a score or index, and they will show you that in the human rights following is not there. So that will be in media, and hence India's credibility will be impacted. So government will be forced to take measure. So what is UN Convention Against Torture? It aims to prevent torture and other acts of cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment around the world. The convention requires states to take effective measures to prevent torture in any territory under jurisdiction, and forbids states to transport people. So human trafficking is also not allowed. So this is the UN Convention of Torture. Okay, so you can read it. Then Committee Against Torture, again it is, you can just read these facts. These are just mere facts. Okay. Now Kuwait expat bill. Now Kuwait is a very small oil-rich country. And why it is in news? Because Kuwait government has come with a bill. Bill is a proposed law in future. And as per this bill, what the bill is saying, that they might the people who are not natives of Kuwait, they will be forced to leave. So as per the bill, total of 8 lakh Indians could be forced to leave Kuwait, as it is. Its National Assembly Committee has approved draft expat quota bill reducing number of foreign workers in Gulf country. So this is the total 4.8 million. 4.8 means 48 lakh population, out of which 1.4 million are Indians. Okay, that is huge, right? Almost how many percent? Almost more than 25%, 30%. And how much money they give to India? $4.8 billion. See, if you try to understand, this is India, right? Okay, so this is, let's say, sorry. So this is India. Okay, so this is, sorry. Okay, so this is Northeast. So this is India. So this is India. So this whole is, you can say Middle East. Here, from here, the whole is Middle East. And this Middle East is, you can say zone of energy zone. But this energy zone employs a lot of Indians. Around 7 million people are employed here, and they send huge amount of. So when they send dollar to India, so that dollar is called remittance. Okay, So India is the world. So India is number one in the world. India's top recipient of remittances, with the diaspora sending whooping 79 billion back home in 2018, as per the World Bank. It is followed by China 67 billion, Mexico 36 billion, and Philippines 34 and Egypt 29. So India is the biggest recipient of remittance economy. So the Indians living in Gulf, whosoever Indians, all the Indians who are living in Gulf, they send their income to India, and we have states like Kerala. In Kerala, there's a term used called money order economy. Okay, so Kerala gets its money from there. Okay, because there are a lot of people from Kerala, they are living in Gulf. So what does expat bill all about? So recently kya hua hai, in the past 2-3 years, the oil prices are fluctuating, and all these countries, they depend on oil income and they are losing money. So because their economy is suffering, and that is where they are looking ways in which the employment in their country is addressed. Unemployment, sorry. So amid the oil slump in the oil prices and coronavirus pandemic, there is been spike in anti-expat rhetoric as lawmakers and government official calls for reducing the number of foreigners in Kuwait. According to the bill, Indians should not exceed 15% of the population. Okay, right now they're 25%, which means rest will have to leave. Draft, once turned into law, will impose a cap on the number of expat and gradually reduce the number of people by almost 5% on yearly basis. So every year 5% will come down, and Kuwait has a real problem, and its population structure 70% are expats. So only 30% people are natives. So 1.3 million of the 3.5 expat are either illiterate or can merely read and write, and Kuwait has been working to reduce its dependence on foreign workers. So this is the problem. So we have huge diaspora. There are 2,800 Indians working for Kuwaiti government in various jobs like nurses, engineers, companies, few as scientists, and majority of Indians, 5.23 lakh, are employed in private sectors, and there are 1.16 lakh dependents. So out of this, a lot of people will come back. There are 60,000 Indian students studying in 23 Indian schools in the country. So this whole diaspora is stake, and you can say almost 8 lakh Indians. That is huge, right? And the kind of money they bring, that will also come down. So India is going to lose on that account. The current population of Kuwait is 4.3 million, and Kuwaitis make up 1.3 million of the population, and expats account for 3 million. The bill will result 8 lakh Indians leaving Kuwait, as the Indian community constitutes the largest expat community in totaling 1.45 million. As per Ministry of External Affairs, Indians present in all segments of society, Kuwait are largely disciplined, hardworking, and law-abiding. And Indians have also played a very strong role in the development of Kuwait, and there is a strong bilateral ties also between India and Kuwait. So this is there. In fact, among all the Middle East nations, because they were energy rich, the only thing, that 90% of their income is coming from oil. But this oil, now they're losing money on the oil. Why? Because the oil prices are going down. Because countries are adapting to new technologies. So we have solar technologies are coming. We have technologies where the green or climate change initiatives are being made. So even today, fossil fuel is the main fuel. Even today, you can say 70-75% of the energy requirement comes from the fossil fuel only. But this number, will country like India mein to rahega, but many countries are adapting. So in future, you might say that movement away from fossil fuels, and this Middle East country might face a problem in the future, and that is where they're looking ways in which they should ensure that employment is given to their own people rather than outside people. So this is the problem. Recently there was a law in Nitakat law in Saudi Arabia. So there also, if you are living in Saudi Arabia with your family, you have to pay money. You have to some kind of amount you have to pay every month, every year, okay, per family. So not only you but your family, number of dependents. Let's say you have 2 children, so you have to define a certain amount into 2. So you'll be forced to send your children to India, because there the cost of living will be higher. You have to pay to the government of Saudi Arabia. So all these countries, they are trying their level best to reduce the number of employment, and they are ensuring that the employment in their country is given to their population, because they have a really good time, right, from 1960s till 1950s, 60s, 70s, all till 2010. They have had a very gala time, and they have earned a lot of money. So this was a time of oil money. Okay, so this is the problem. Okay. Now there is a law called CASTA. What is CASTA? Let's understand. CASTA stands for Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanction Act. Now, America has this law, and America says that if any country has a relation with America, and if that country is trying to purchase any item, so let's say India and US have a relation, and India and US are into arms dealing, or or something like, but India also does with Russia. Now, when the Russian item will come to India, so USA says that since this Russian item will come to India, and the technology will be in such a manner that these technology might might use, or might through somehow they get information of the US arms also, and that would be counterproductive to their country security interests. And that is where they say that any country who does a business or trade with the country who are against America, so they might impose this law, CASTA, Countering America's Adversary Through Sanction Act. So what has happened that India is the largest arm importer of the world. Okay, so largest arm importer of the world, and we import from USA, Israel, France, USSR or Russia, you can say, and Russia is one of the biggest player. So recently, US has planned to purchase MiG-19 aircraft with Russia estimated to be 18,148 crore, and US has reacted to countries including India on sanctions of purchase of Russian arms has not changed. So they say that if you purchase, so there's a US federal law that imposes sanctions on Iran, North Korea, and Russia. So whichever country which has a relation with the USA, and if they purchase something from these three countries, then in that situation things are going to change, and the sanction might apply against India in that case. So bill provides sanctions for activities concerning cybersecurity, crude oil projects, financial institutions, corruption, human right abuses, evasion of sanctions, transaction of Russian defense and intelligence sector. Remember, this is the point here. Export pipelines, privatization of state-owned assets by government official, arms transfers to Russia. So as for this CASTA, this provision where India and Russia are doing trade. So as per this provision, any Russian technology, if it is employed by Indian Army, okay, so that will be counterproductive to USA, because Indian Army is also using USA's item. So maybe there is a fear among USA people that that information might reach to Russian people as well. So while US has become the second largest defense supplier, mainly the aircraft and the artillery, India still relies heavily on Russian equipment such as submarines and missiles, and that has been that US has been unwilling to provide. 70% of Indian military hardware is Russian in origin, and recently India has also said that it'll take S-400 Triumph air defense system. So what is air defense system? So air defense system is a mix of ballistic missiles and radars. So what happens basically? What are ballistic missiles? So there are two kind of missiles we have in the world. एक होता है ballistic missiles, okay, and the second ones are the cruise missiles. So ballistic missiles, what are ballistic missiles? So the ballistic missiles are like that. So if you hit them, they have a trajectory defined. So they will go like that. Okay. So let's say that it can travel 4,000 kilometers. So it will go like a parabola. It will hit, and then it is a path and going to hit the target. So this is ballistic missile. The cruise missile, on the contrary, are missiles which are like which have aircraft engine in them. Okay, so they go like a aircraft. The advantage of cruise missile is that they are smaller, they are very agile, they're very flexible, they can move at a very lower height. Okay, at a height of a tree also they can move. Okay, so they can move at a lower height, and hence they are difficult to track. But ballistic missiles are big missiles. They can move from one continent to another, so they're also called as intercontinental missiles. Intercontinental ballistic missiles can also be there, ICBMs. Okay, so they can move up to 15,000 kilometers. So let's say any country attacks India on any country attacks India through missile. So air defense system will counter that. So it will moment the somebody is attacking through a missile. So our radars will catch that information within the Indian airspace. So the moment they come close to Indian airspace, our radar will catch them, and moment our radar will catch them, so our radar will track them first. Ki what is the speed, trajectory, where it might go to hit, and then it will activate the missiles, and then this ballistic missile will go and hit this target, and that will that the missile, the incoming missile from whichever country, it will be destroyed in the air only. So this is called defense, air defense system. So you have a system where in anybody, if you attacks, let's say Pakistan or China attacks India and missiles, so we have air defense system already employed. So we can easily, track them, in within the atmosphere, and can neutralize the entire thing. So this is the concept of air defense system. So India has, is doing a deal with Russia on S-400 air defense system. Okay. So notably, Russia is India's major defense supplier for 6 decades, and Iran is the second largest oil supplier. So Russia, Iran, North Korea, these are the countries with which USA has a problem. So USA has used their federal law that anybody, any country, if they do deal with Russia, Iran, and North Korea, so for them, CASTA restrictions might be imposed. So coincidence, CASTA has not been invoked by USA twice already, both times for countries for buying Triumph system from Russia. In September 2018, US announced sanctions for procurement of S-Triumph air defense and Sukhoi aircraft, and Washington expelled Turkey from the F-35 fighter jet program in this July, after first delivery of S-400 was received. India is neither like China, which has inimical relationship with US, hence not bound by the dictates, nor like Turkey, which is a NATO ally of US. So India is saying, see, your fears are unfounded, and you should not see. We have a deal, and we will take them. Them. So, but USA is putting pressure in India, so that we should not do deal with Iran or maybe other nations. Okay, Russia. So this is the problem. North Korea से तो वैसे भी कोई नहीं मिलता है, but Iran is a good friend of India, but recent time the relationship has been bad only because of US pressure. And Russia is the only country in the world which can counter America in terms of technology. So Russia is the only country in the world which can counter America in terms of technology. Even China is way behind, and they have an old history of Cold War. So that is a problem. Okay, so this is CASTA. Now, smart cities mission. So this is a smart cities mission, and here registration has been opened, and this is it is promoting cycles, Indian cycle for change. So to inspire Indian cities, so there is 100 smart cities mission are there. So what is smart cities? Smart cities are technology driven cities. Okay, so technology driven cities, so they will make cities more adaptive. People will be more friendly, the governance structure would be highly decentralized, they'll use technology in almost all the areas, and maybe everything would be e-mode. That is what the objective of smart cities are there. And recently the smart city mission, right now it is under Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and they have launched with registration of India Cycle Challenge. So what they want that in this COVID period, people should start using cycles. Okay, so to inspire Indian cities to implement quickly cycle-friendly interventions in the wake of COVID-19, with the support of citizens, assistance from the experts, cities would be encouraged to create extensive cycling network using low-cost methods like pop-up cycle lanes, non-motorized zones. This आप पढ़ लीजिएगा. These are just factual thing is there. Okay, and what will happen? So there'll be usually what they do, that they have a proposal, and all the 100 cities will will be challenging among themselves. They will compete among themselves. So all eligible cities will can register, submit. Okay, and here registration of citizens and all that thing will happen. So you can just read it. Okay, so कैसे चलेगा वो सारा scheme है. These are mere facts. Questions will not come on this. Rather, question will come that what are this mission, under what is smart cities, what are this mission, what will do, all that. Okay. Now, Mongolian Kanjur manuscript. Okay, so what is so Ministry of Culture has taken up project of reprinting 108 volumes of Mongolian Kanjur under National Mission for Manuscript. So now all the old historical manuscripts, so it is being digitalized. Okay, and we are reprinting in the book form. That is what is happening. So first step of 5 volumes were presented to the President of India, and that is why it is in news. So what is Mongolian Kanjur? Now this is important from art and culture, remember, in UPSC. A Buddhist canonical text of 108 volumes is considered the most important religious text in Mongolia. In the Mongolian language, Kanjur, so it is a language, means concise orders. From the orders of Lord Buddha in particular, it has been translated from Tibetan. It is held in high esteem by Mongolian Buddhists, and they worship the Kanjur at temples and recite the lines of Kanjur in daily life as rituals. The Kanjur is almost kept almost in every monastery in Mongolia. The language of Kanjur is classical Mongolian and is a source of providing cultural identity to Mongolia. So why it is in news? Because we have created volumes of their book. Okay, and their body which has done is called National Mission for Manuscript. So National Mission for Manuscript is doing all that. The mission was launched on February 2003 under the Ministry of Tourism and Culture with the mandate of documenting, conserving, disseminating the knowledge preserved in the manuscript. See, all the historical knowledge, historical facts, traditional, you can say traditional knowledge, all that needs to be preserved, and that is where the mission is to preserve the technology. It is, we can do R&D, and there's a lot to learn from them. That is what is the objective. So one of the objective of mission is to publish rare and unpublished manuscripts so that knowledge enshrined in them is to spread to researchers, scholars, and general public in that large. Another scheme, pre-printing 108 volume, has been taken by the mission. So this is the concept of manuscript. Now, Riva solar project. So this is a news. Recently, PM Modi inaugurated this project. It consists of 3 solar generating 250 megawatt, each located at 500 hectare plot situated inside solar park. So there is a solar park of 1500 hectares, and wahan pe 3 250 megawatt plant are there, which means 3 750 megawatt. Okay, solar park was developed by Riva Ultra Mega Solar Limited, a joint venture company of Madhya Pradesh and Urja Vikas Nigam Limited and Solar Energy Corporation of India PSU. A project is the first solar project in the country to break grid parity barrier. What is grid parity barrier? So energy or power is generated from 2 sources. First is the traditional sources, the conventional energy, the fossil fuel, and the second is the renewable energy sources. In a normal situation, the traditional energy, that is power from coal or gas, whatever being produced, they are cheaper. But because of the innovation in the solar technology and because of the way solar technology is being developed, today we have reached a level where the cost of generating per unit of the power, now it is equal or it is lesser by renewable energy technology. So that is an example. That is probably, you can say, indication in future that tomorrow we can easily move to renewable energy, and maybe that is a reality. So हमारा जो cost per unit kilowatt hour जो होता है, so 1 unit is 1 kilowatt hour. So it's like if there are 1000 watt bulb, it runs for 1 hour. Okay, so 1000 watt is 1 kilowatt. So that is called 1 kilowatt hour. So 1 kilowatt hour. So if you run a 1000 watt bulb for 1 hour, it will 1 kilowatt hour, and 1 kilowatt hour is 1 unit, which means the cost of 1 unit is, let's say, 3, 4 or 5 rupees. Okay. So if you consume electricity bill, kaise aata hai? Number of units. So let's say you have used 500 units. So 500 into probably, let's say, 5 rupees unit. So 2500 is your electricity bill. And then there are some fixed charges. And then there are taxes. Okay, so total it comes, let's say, 2900. So you're paying 2500 for the electricity bill, and rest is the fixed charges. So that is called 1 unit. So 1 unit cost by the renewable energy has come down. Now the cost has come down, and that is a example. Compared to prevailing solar project tariff approximate 4.50, the river project have achieved the historical result. पहले जो था वो 4.50 per unit था solar से, now it has come down to 2.97 per unit, and tariff escalation of 0.05 unit over period of 15 years, and levelized rate of 3.30 over a term of 25 years, which means 25 year में जो average cost है, that is 3.3 rupees per unit, and that is very good example, because in future you can easily go to the solar power. The project is also first renewable energy to supply institutional customer outside the state. Why? Because 24% जिसका power होगा, it will go to Delhi Metro, and the rest will be provided to the Madhya Pradesh. So Rewa is in Madhya Pradesh, remember. It's a district in Madhya Pradesh. The project also exemplifies India's commitment to achieve 175 gigawatt installed renewable energy capacity by 2022, and including 100 gigawatts. So national, our mission in the renewable energy sector is 175 gigawatt. और अभी हमारा जो इंस्टॉल्ड कैपेसिटी है दैट इज अराउंड 340 गीगावाट. सो ये हमारा करंटली इंस्टॉल्ड कैपेसिटी है, एंड हियर ऑलमोस्ट 70-75% इज फ्रॉम द fossil fuel, gas based, coal based plant. But now government has taken ambitious target. By 2022 we're going to create 175 gigawatt of additional renewable energy, out of which 100 gigawatt कहाँ से आएगा? वो सोलर से आएगा, and rest will come from wind and other sources. So this 100 gigawatt is a big challenge. It's not a small target. It's like you are creating जो बिजली बन रही है, whatever electricity we are producing today, almost 1/3, a little less than 1/3 you want to produce in the next 2 to 3 years. So that is huge challenge. Already out of 100 gigawatt we have met around 50%. 50% हमने already met कर लिया है, and right now hundreds of projects that are going across India at various central and state government level. And here government has two mission. Out of 100 gigawatt, government wants that 60 gigawatt should be grid connected. Okay, grid connected, which means these are power plants, bijli jo banegi, that will go to the grid. It will go to the grid. And 40 gigawatt should be solar rooftops. Okay, so you can easily, so people like you and me, if we want to purchase, let's say you have an inverter, and you don't want to charge your inverter with electricity, rather you want to have solar panel. So you can put a solar panel and your battery is connected with that. So you don't have to pay for this. Okay, and so this is rooftop. Okay, rooftop solar grid. So 40 gigawatt is what government is ensuring that the people like us, the common people, the household or the business or the government companies or the firms should have the solar power. And across India, the government is promoting it at commercial level, and the cost has also come down to high level. So पहले की तरह जो electricity का cost है उससे भी cheaper है, and that is the advantage we'll have. Now there are some news for environment. These are mere factual news. So species in news. So right now there is a butterfly called Himalayan butterfly called golden birdwig. It is the India's largest recorded butterfly. So what can be asked is basically, largest butterfly kahan pe pai jati hai and all that is there. So you can, these are factual news, so you can directly you can read it. These are factual. They come, where are they found? Kerala, Kochi, which part? So many a times question is being asked here. Direct MCQs can be asked here. Okay, so I will not go, just read it. Technicalities are there. Now this is important. Satking Wildlife Sanctuary. Now this is Bhutan, this is India, this is China, Nepal, this is Arunachal Pradesh. So there's a Satking Wildlife Sanctuary. So what has happened, that China has a border problem with Bhutan also. So recently, China has recently claimed Satking Wildlife Sanctuary in eastern Bhutan as its own territory. Why it has happened? See, Satking is a wildlife sanctuary located mostly in the Trasi Gang district, just crossing the border in the Bhutan district. It is one of the country's protected areas. Protected means no activities allowed, human activity, and it is in the list of tentative site of Bhutan's tentative list of UNESCO inclusion. Now UNESCO is a body which focuses on the conservation of important world heritage site. So all these heritage site could be the wildlife also, or it can be some maybe monument or structure like that. So UNESCO इसको identify करता है, it is in the list, and the UNESCO gives them money and support also. Okay, money support is given, and that is how you maintain that structure. So it was in news because of that, and but China claimed that this is mine, and that is a problem with Bhutan and China. So Bhutan and China had no formal diplomatic relations, but 24 rounds of boundary disputes have happened. Talks have concentrated on the north and west, but ये East Bhutan में है. Okay, so Sakting is close to the border of Andhra Pradesh, and China attempted to stop UNDP Global Environment Fund (GEF) to funding for Sakting by claiming that it was disputed but was overruled. So here the funding will be given to this wildlife sanctuary, and here in the conservation part will be done. But China has said that it is mine. So boundary between China and Bhutan has never been delimited. There have been disputes over the eastern, central, and western, this thing. And China last month attempted to stop funding for the Sakting sanctuary from United Nations Development Program Global Environment Facility on the grounds it was disputed territory. So that is why it is in news. The reason for dispute, according to the written records, there has been no mention of eastern Bhutan, where Satkang is based as per the boundary negotiation. Negotiation has not been held since Doklam. 2017, India, China also had a Doklam issue. But remember, Doklam was this tri-junction, remember? So Doklam was somewhere here in the tri-junction. So this somewhere here. So when this Doklam issue was there, so Doklam is in Bhutan only, but Indian Chinese army tried to control that area. So Indian army went and we stood against them. So when we stood against them, the Chinese said, "Who are you? Why are you coming?" So Indian said, "See, we have a agreement with Bhutan where we will help them if needed." So that Doklam standoff happened between Indian and Chinese troops in 2017, and that troop have won for months. जैसे अभी चल रहा है, the same thing. In fact, even bigger than that. So Bhutan has always maintained a silent, discreet silence on its boundary negotiations with China, and does not have any formal diplomatic relations with Beijing. International relations next month हम लोग start करेंगे, probably in the first week of August, and there I'll be discussing India's foreign policy and international relations between India and various other countries. Okay. Then Dehing Patkai Wildlife Sanctuary. So recently Assam government has decided to upgrade Dehing Patkai Wildlife Sanctuary into a national park. So what is a wildlife sanctuary? What is a national park? See, wildlife sanctuary is like, basically moment you say this is a wildlife sanctuary, so a particular kind of, wildlife, lives there, and hence there is some protection is given. But the protection is very simple. You can easily go there or you can travel. But if that is converted into national park, extreme restrictions are there. Okay, so not only to the flora, then flower and this thing, but fauna, that is animals as well, and extreme restriction is there. So moment you convert a wildlife sanctuary to a national park, which means now government is giving it as a priority. They want to protect that wildlife or other thing of that area, and human intervention should not be there. So ये एक news में है, and this announcement comes just after National Board of Wildlife gave conditional clearance to coal mining project of CIL in the same elephant reserve. So Dehing Patkai Elephant Reserve है, उसके अंदर, inside that Dehing Patkai Elephant Reserve, it is there. So as a national park, its importance will increase and new rules will be increased, vigilance into the area. While the proposal to accord national park status has been given in 1995, Dehing Patkai was declared a wildlife sanctuary in 2004. Okay, so that is what it has happened. So there has been a movement also against coal mining. Okay. So Dehing Patkai is located within the larger Dehing Patkai Elephant Reserve, which spreads across coal and oil-rich districts of Upper Assam. Dehing Patkai Wildlife Sanctuary is also known as Jaipur Rainforest. Okay, so these are important for MCQs. Remember, Dehing is the name of the river that flows through this forest, and Patkai is the hill at the top, at the foot of which the sanctuary lies. Okay, so Dehing is the river. It is the oldest refinery of Asia, Digboi, and open cast old mining. What is open cast? Open mining. Okay, so you do open mining. There are two kind of mining. One is open mining. You just put the dynamites and you break the this rocks, and this is a coal basically. or you make a drill and you go inside, and that is called drilling. Okay, deep mining. So this is open cast coal mining and located near the sanctuary. It is famous for Assam Valley tropical wet evergreen forest bordering Arunachal Pradesh. Okay, so this is it. Rare fauna. Fauna means animal life is found in this region include Chinese pangolin, flying fox, wild pig, sambar, barking deer, gaur, sero, Malayan giant squirrels. It is the only sanctuary in India which is home to 7 different species. Now remember, this is very important from current affair point of view because it's in news, so you have to be very thorough. Okay. Tiger, leopard, clouded, leopard cat, blah blah blah. Assamese macaw, a primate found in the forest, is in the red list of near threatened species. So these are the list of the animals which are there. It has the highest concentration of rare endangered white-winged wood duck. Okay, so many times UPSC gives such questions. It is practically impossible to learn all of them, but at least I'll make a list of the important ones in news in past 1.5 years, and then I can easily reach out to the questions which are there in news. Because UPSC, they will not ask random questions. Whatever is in news, chances are there they'll ask from there. So Dehing Patkai is deciduous forest, rainforest interspersed by semi-green lush green forest. So you will study environment, and there you will study about vegetation also. You'll be able to understand. This is the 6th national park of Assam. Okay, so that completes this. Now there is a fungi called. There's a fungi. You can see the fungi. Ochiocordis Newton fungi. So what is this fungi? This Ochiocordisceps nutans fungi for the first time in central India. They are found setting out on the plant survey at the Kangar Valley National Park in Bastar, Chhattisgarh. Earlier, these were only reported in Western Ghat. So ये जो आपका fungi था, ये was only found in Western Ghat. Now it has found in Chhattisgarh. So what they do, it hosts on specific insect. So एक insect होता है Holymorpha. So it hosts on the fungi host on that. The fungi उसको kill करता है, उसपे survive करता है. And this is known as stung bug. So this is a sting bug. It is a bug which stings, and this fungi attacks them. Okay, it attacks them, and sting bug is known to damage to the flower and fruits of the soybean, green pea, apple, pear. So what does it do? The fungi infect the insect when alive and develop fungal mycelium, vegetative part of the fungus, inside the chest. The spores sprout out from between the insect thorax head, killing the insect, but it continues to take nutrition from the dead body. The fungi are very host specific, and so the spores travel and infect sting bugs only. So they attack these bugs. Now remember, these bugs are not good. So basically the fungi is good for us. The studies have shown that these fungi can be used as a biological pest control against the sting bugs, and exploring the fungi as a pesticide will help reduce the harmful effect of chemicals in field. So instead of using the harmful chemicals, why don't we use the fungi maybe, or something made from the fungi? Several species of this fungi have medicinal properties. Reports show that China has been traditionally using it. In the Western Ghats, local people use this fungi as an immune stimulator as well. Okay, so this is also important news from prelims point of view. These are rich in biologically active metabolics, vitamin C, phenolic compounds, which is basically found in disinfectant, and have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. So medicines की तरह भी use होता है. Okay, so this is the Newton fungi. I think probably this is the bug, and this is the fungi. Coming to the last news, today's last news, hosting the refugees. So Bhashan Char Island. So Bhashan Char Island, where it is, so government has proposed settling a Rohingya. Rohingyas are Muslims from Myanmar, and there's a province called Rakhine province. This is a Rakhine province. So this is a native of Rohingyas. Now Rohingyas are a Muslim who used to live in Myanmar, and these Rohingyas were exploited in there because Myanmar is a Buddhist country. So the problem, the riots happened, between Buddhists and Rohingya Muslims, and that is where Myanmar government forced the Rohingyas to Myanmar military rather forced the Rohingyas to leave the country. So Bangladesh government had proposed settling Rohingya Bhashan Char, an uninhabited island on the estuary of Meghna River. So कहाँ पर है वो? यहाँ पर होगा कहीं. This is it, right? This is it. So Bangladesh has announced it will not move the Rohingyas settled on Bhasan Island amid Corona pandemic. Bhasan Char, also known as Char Pia, is an island in Hatia, Bangladesh. Island is formed with Himalayan split on spanning 40 square kilometers. It is underwater from June to September annually because of monsoon. It has no flood fences. Okay, in 2015, Bangladeshi government suggested resettling Rohingyas on the island under its Ashrayan project, and the proposal was characterized by UN Refugee Agency as logistically challenging. So this is what the Bhasan Island has been news. Now recently government has announced, Bangladeshi government, that we will not move them. Okay, so that completes today's news. Any facts, anything you want to ask, the questions? So that is all for today. Thank you very much.